Question number 7, Dr. David Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Economic Development and asks, how much smaller in percentage terms is the floor area of the main exhibition hall at the New Zealand International Convention Centre announced yesterday when compared to the 10,000 square metre exhibition space heralded in 2011 when SkyCity became the government's preferred development partner? And how many fewer exhibitors does such a reduction represent in a world-class convention centre?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr. Speaker, the member uses an interesting term in his question where he suggests heralding. I can't actually pinpoint where the heralding occurred, but I can tell the member that the proposed size of the exhibition space has varied a lot as this project has developed. For example, the Crown's expressions of interest called for greater than 6,000 square metres. SkyCity's initial concept images suggested 10,000 square metres but included catering areas. It then became 7,500 square metres in the exhibition centre. I'll just help.
I'll hear from the point of order, but if it is, I haven't got my answer yet. I think if we gave the Minister time to answer, it may well arrive. The Honourable Stephen Joyce, if he could give us the answer.
Thank you. It then became 7,500 square metres following independent advice from Horwath as to what was required. It then became 8,500 square metres at concept design, followed by 8,768 square metres at the first preliminary design stage, and now dropping to 8,100 square metres in the revised preliminary design. So for completeness, Mr. Speaker, and to be helpful to the House, the percentage movements are up 67%, down 25%, up 13%, up 3%, and down 7.6%, and for the member's particular example, 19%. In terms of how many exhibitors each change represents, that would depend on how much space each exhibitor occupied.
Supplementary question, Dr.
But no, point of order, sir.
Point of order, Dr.
I understand that the first part of my question was answered, if we look at it strictly. The second part, sir, and it was a question on notice.
The second part was also answered as well in the member's answer. Yes, very definitely.
Sir, there's a definition that they're working with of what a world-class...
Then if the member wants to... In my opinion, there was absolutely no doubt the question's been answered. If the member wants to now take it further, the answer is using supplementary question. Dr. David Clark.
What is 2,850 as a percentage of 5,000?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm not quite as good as the old mental calculations as I was in the old days, but 2,850 as a percentage of 5,000, definitely more than half and definitely less than 60%.
Supplementary question, Dr. David Clark.
When the maximum conference capacity in the SkyCity deal announced yesterday is just 57% of the maximum capacity mooted before other bidders were knocked out of the process that the Auditor-General described as neither transparent nor even-handed, how can he say the taxpayer is getting a good deal?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry for the member that the supposition in his question is incorrect on about 3 levels.
Supplementary question, Dr. David Clark.
What value has been attributed in the final deal to the additional income SkyCity has received as a result of the laneway retail development?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr. Speaker, well, actually, that's an interesting question. I have been advised of a value of around $4 million, and of course, SkyCity have increased their size, their contribution by $28 million. So it would suggest that the Crown is doing better under this revised deal than it was previously. Well, it happens to be...
Order. Supplementary question, Dr. David Clark.
How can he tell New Zealanders he's delivered the promised world-class convention centre when he has delivered a convention centre 19% smaller than at maximum capacity, that at maximum capacity accommodates just 57% of the conference guests mooted when SkyCity edged other competing bidders out, and that is built off the back of problem gambling?
Honourable Stephen
Mr. Speaker,
Joyce.
the member is incorrect on a number of ways, and it'll take a little bit of time because he obviously didn't listen to the primary question. This is an important issue, I presume, otherwise the member wouldn't ask the question. So, the initial expression of interest from the Crown called for 6,000 square metres, then became 7,500 square metres following independent advice from Horwath as to what was required. The actual second revised preliminary design is 8,100 square metres, Mr Speaker. I've also sought advice in terms of the current size of the revised International Convention Centre, and it has absolutely no negative impact on the initial assessment of economic benefit as supplied by Horwath. So the member is simply wrong, and trying to create a figure and then subtract a percentage is frankly, although typical, actually quite silly.
Order. Question number 8.